Hello, it's a review today and we're dealing with a robot. I occasionally do these things from time to time and I make absolutely no apologies for it because the idea of these sort of things is it's a sort of STEM thing. It's for kids and sort of teenagers to get into programming, into building stuff, and I think that's really important, not just for general learning, but I feel that the sort of approach to programming is a really good general problem solving skill, so I like it. It's not going to be a quad or anything today, it's going to be this. It's by a company called SunFounder, and the difference between this and many of the other kits I've looked at before, generally speaking the other kits are all Arduino based. This one, as it might give away from the title, it's called the PiCar-X, which means it runs on a Raspberry Pi. Now you don't get everything in the kit you need. Specifically, you will need a Raspberry Pi 4 of your own and obviously an SD card to run it, and you will need some batteries, which is two 18650s, which if you're in the hobby, you probably have a few. Anyway, let's go to close up, let's unbox this, see what's in there, and then let's see how it all goes together and what we do with it. Okay, so here's the box. PiCarX. Let's open it up and see what's inside. First thing, and this is literally the first time I've opened the box, the instructions, which look quite a lot there. Well, I'll show that a bit later so we can have a proper look. Then under here we've got the main, looks like the main body. We've got several little sections. Here's one, here's the next one. I guess that's all of it. Just check, so if this lifts out. No, there's more. There's 3 sections. Oh wow. So okay, first impression, packaging looks very cool. Second thing to note, this frame is aluminium. I think this is somewhat reflected in the price. This is a little bit more expensive than normal stuff. The normal stuff like this one I built, normally being built out of plastic or some sort of resin type stuff. But yeah, let's get all this stuff out, see what we've actually got here. So this are the frame pieces. Some wiring bits there. Okay, so in shelf number 1 I would call that mostly frame and bits of wiring. Box number 2, we've got some fixtures, we've got the little camera, we've got 2 motors, four wheels, and under there there's a little on key and a little spanner. And then in this last one, we've got some servo horns, some sort of plastic cover. This is going to be like a hat that sits on the Pi. See, we've got a little speaker there. There's something in this called text to speech. We can basically send it text and get it to speak things. That's the idea there. We've got 1, 2, 3 servos. Says this is a 3-channel grayscale sensor, and this one, I've seen this sort of thing before, looks like an ultrasonic sensor. Put that there. Then we've got the battery holder. This takes 18650 batteries, they're not included, one thing to note. And finally we've got this pretty nice looking little Phillips screwdriver. That's quite cool. Okay, that's all our stuff we need aside from the Pi. Important to say again that the Pi doesn't come with it, it's something you have to supply. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to check off our components against this list, make sure it's all there, and then we'll take it step by step and we'll do the construction and basically see how it goes. Take it from there. Okay, so one quick thing to pick up on here, if this is going to focus. Just when I got these out and sort of laid them out, okay, it's just the labelling. Sometimes it's best to be a little bit more explicit. So where you've got spring washer mentioned and 1.5x4 self-tapping screw, when you actually get to it, it just says M3. It doesn't say it's a spring washer. And I feel this is, this is a kit that people may not know what a spring washer looks like. And ditto, I can tell that's a self-tapping screw.
some beginners might not be able to, and focus, there we go. Just these little things, little extra bits would, I think, really help. But I've got it all laid out, it's all ready to go, so it's assembling time. Okay, let's crack on with the main build, and it looks like we're mounting the battery onto the plate. And for a while I thought this ribbon was just a piece of packaging. I'm glad I checked through the component list to see what was there, because it actually listed the ribbon as one of them, and it's quite obvious when you see it because it helps you take the batteries back out again. Right, let's put this together. Okay, step 1 is complete, along with my lovely ribbon work. Once again, this time they're calling these M3x4 countersunk screw, which of course it is, but earlier they decided it was called a nylon M3x4 screw. Just stick to one. Anyway, number 2, let's put the standoffs on. Okay, standoffs mounted, that was a pretty easy one. Next up, looks like we're mounting the motors. Okay, done. A little bit fiddly, just because, you know, you have to get your spanner and Allen key to get those in, but all good. Next, pretty quick one looking, we're getting our Pi and we're mounting it on those standoffs. Okay, pretty quick, as you might expect. Great pains to say again, this is my own Pi. This is a Pi 4. You don't get it supplied, you have to have one. So the next couple of bits I think I'll do at the same time, because they sort of go together. What we're doing, we're putting the FCC cable, it's called, essentially the camera cable, onto the Pi, and that's going to go out the front, presumably to go into the camera. Big thing about making sure you put it the right way around. But what we're essentially doing is we're popping the hat, it's going to fit directly onto the GPIO pins of the Pi, and then we're going to put the case on it. So we'll do 5 and 6 together and come back. Okay, that's the Pi 4 in nicely. One thing it does though is ask you to turn this around inside, which creates this kind of awkward thing to do, but yeah, it's done, it's together, so that bit's okay. Next up, we're adding the servo arm, attaching the ultrasonic module, and putting a couple of standoffs in. I'll do these bits together and we'll have another look. Okay, that's that one done. Not really any tricky bits to speak of. I never particularly like self-tapping screws in these kits, but these are particularly easy to fit in. I suppose the only other thing to note is making sure you get the ultrasonic sensor right. So the ultrasonic sensor fits in behind the main unit. It's got its bit there, and then you get these little, they call them rivets, they're basically plastic rivets to bolt that together. The next part, which bizarrely goes like this, it's about putting the camera module in something that goes onto a servo. So yeah, let's take this slow. Let's get the camera module in there and then see how the rest of it fits. Turn the brightness down, that's better. Okay, not particularly happy with that step. It was definitely the fiddliest and least thought out. I mean, it's not too bad getting the screws in there to mount the camera, but getting the screws in this servo hole there is, well, just didn't work. You've got a screwdriver that will drive at an angle. We can get through here to get that one, but these two, no way. I had to take my own screwdriver bit and get it in that way, but it's very fiddly and not too great, but you know, it's in there in a fashion. Next up, we're going to be actually mounting the servos and putting it in something. I can't tell what part that is. We'll figure that out when we get there. Okay, it makes slightly more sense when you follow it through. It's basically the pen and tilt, which go like that. At this point, what I'm supposed to do is attach that into there, and then that whole thing will pop in there. So at this point, you're supposed to put it together, zero the servo, then put the screw in. It seems a bit weird to put it together and then zero the servo, because you'll have to take it apart again if the servo moves. Now, to do the zeroing of the servo, there is a P11 supplied, but it seems like you have to do something, maybe do some EZblock programming before that actually does anything. So I'm going to get onto the computer and see what we have to do there.
Okay, and here's where we get with that link in the instructions. It talks about, before assembling, download and install EZblock OS, which brings us up to here. And what we're doing here is we're essentially downloading an image file that will write onto the SD card, which will basically run the Pi. And here it's got download Raspberry Pi Imager and write it that way. I've got my own stuff on here, but yeah, let's go ahead and get this thing downloaded and write it to a card. Then we can finally do the servo zeroing. And as mentioned, I already had an image writer for Raspberry Pis. This one's called Apple Pie Baker because I'm on a Mac. I use this one, but the one they supplied in the instruction works just as well.
Okay, well, I built that image. I put the SD card in, so if I now turn this on, I've got that servo plugged in. But one thing I wanted to just stress is that you would need to wait for the Pi to actually boot up. When you just first turn it on, nothing happens. It goes through its sort of boot up sequence, which takes a little while. There's something from the speaker, and eventually, what's going to happen? It enters the servo, and that's all good. It's much easier just to sort of leave it like that, and then just dynamically plug the next one in. That's set. So that's good. Now we can screw that together. And there it is all attached. I have to admit I jumped on slightly to step 19 without realising it. Finding this a bit wobbly until I found it in 19. I had to put this little washer there to stop it wobbling about so much. But yeah, it's there. It's all on board. Next we're putting on the steering servo, and there's a kind of, it's almost like a rack pinion type of thing. But yeah, let's get that in place and see how it fits together. Whilst I'm just waiting for this servo to send to using this P11, it mentions here about putting a little M1.5 screw there, and you need to make sure it doesn't do it tight so this can actually steer, so it's like in nicely but still nice and loose so the servo won't struggle. This now goes on the bottom of here, and then we can put the servo screw in like that. Okay, next up we're going to fit this plate at the bottom, then we're going to put the grayscale module underneath, and that looks like this. Right, it's almost starting to look a bit like a robot, and I think it will after this next stage, because what we're doing is putting the wheels on. We've got some plates to put on here, loads of washers and stuff, and then yeah, it's going to look more robot-like. So let's get the wheels on. Yeah, it looks more like a robot, doesn't it? Again, these wheels were pretty fiddly, but it is a proper steering system, so a little bit complicated than the norm. Looks quite neat. Next page and the last page is going to be wiring. Finally find out what to do with all of these. One quick note to mention is, as we've been building this, I've noticed they always put more in than you need, so we've got quite a lot of spare. Should anything break, should you lose bits, you've got quite a good section of hardware there, even including one of the camera cables. Anyway, let's finish this thing off. That is the cabling done. I'm really fighting my strong urge to wrap this here to get it a bit tidier, but it does say don't do that yet. Run some examples, make sure everything's working. You would need to check that out. I would just a small point, but this is just a little hard to read in a 3D diagram. A top-down picture would have been more useful, or labelling. Anyway, that is all of the instructions. It is built. So let's test this out and see how it works and what we have to do stuff with it. Hello and welcome to the kitchen, where we've got the little PiCar-X turned on. I've got my shielded thing for the wire, just tied it up a bit, and what we've done is gone ahead and downloaded EZblock Studio, which is running on my iPhone. Now I've actually gone through and connected this up before, and when you first connect to it, it will ask you to give it your Wi-Fi details so the car itself can log in your local network. What I'm going to do is connect to it because it's already connected and knows about it, and we test out some of the example things. So what we've got in here is we've got a bunch of basic examples, and like there's a move one, and we can go in and say edit, and we can see sort of the block logic there, and if we want to we can see the code in Python as well, and we can say that this is going to go forwards and then backwards and then sort of steer around a bit. Yeah, it looks pretty basic. So if we download that onto the device, it's off. It's crashed into us. So there's no particular rhyme or reason to this one. It just kind of goes forward, backwards, changes the steering a little bit, and then carries on. So let's pause that one. You see we can switch to Python there, and if I go edit the same thing, we can actually see it all in Python code. I have to say I wouldn't like to do any editing for Python code on my phone. That would be a bit of a pain, but it's there if you want it. So what we've got here is a remote control. It's all about controlling the PiCarX, and I'm still in Python. So let's move back to block. And we can see that's pretty basic. It's all about getting a joystick and doing stuff with it. The car's over there at the moment. So why don't we go ahead and run this? So I get this little joystick here. And I can drive it about quite happily. Steer it. It goes quite quick when you want it to. This joystick's a little bit hard to completely control, but it's pretty easy going. You know, it's just my thumb on the control, and you can. Oops, what's happened there? I've accidentally paused it. Should I do that? I can actually. Oops, that's the. Pause that. I can actually move that there, and then we go ahead and play it again. That way my thumb is in a much better position for steering and stuff. One thing I should mention is about the calibration, which is the other thing you can do when you first collect this. If we look at this here, we noticed our wheels are fairly straight, and they weren't like that originally. So if I go into the calibrate section here, and we can change specifically the motor direction from this one and the steering from here. Oh no, this is the pan tilt angle. So if that camera wasn't straight, you can go ahead and make little changes just to do more with it. What I wanted was the. Oh, is this one? This is the steering one. So if your wheels were sort of like that, then you could go ahead and change them all the way over. Mine's actually on -10. So mechanically, I got that the steering servo in just a little bit off center. Anyway, more examples. So more interesting is stuff like human face detection, because it'll give you a video. And the joystick here is, as you can see, is about moving the pan tilt. So if I move this over here like so, let's see if it can pick up my face from over there. Where am I? I'm over here. So you can see, yay, there you go, there's a face. One useful thing about this as well, it's got this little debug window. So if I hit this bug, it will tell me there are currently 0 people, but then if we move the camera up and I just get into position, yeah, it puts the box around me saying, look, there's 1 person there. So that's the face detection. We've got a sound effect thing here. So there's a couple of things you can actually get it to say things, and then you've got some sound effect things as well. So if I play this one first. And that's why that little speaker's underneath, which is quite fun. There's also one that does background music, and it bases that on a slider. So let's download that one. So we've got this slider. These aren't so much apps in their own right, they're just demonstrating some of the little things it can do. Let's go into colour detection, which is quite nifty. This particular one is set to look at things that are red, so it will draw boxes around stuff that's red. So I've got a particular piece of red there on the dog's bread. Oh, that's not red. That's apparently too pinky for it. It's like, that's not red. Some of these walls are apparently red. They got reddish tints to them, but they're not very red. Anyway, the colour detection can be set to all sorts. And again, that's a very simple piece of programming, because it's kind of like you've just got one line that says colour detection to red. So it's kind of all been, the hard work's already been written there. So you can see this one's been expanded a little bit. So it's looking for the number of faces to appear is greater than or equal to 1. And if so, it will say nice to meet you, which is quite a fun one to do. And how does it do its movement here? Okay, it's a joystick one, so that's good. So let's go ahead and run that one. I'm just going to pause this because once again it's put one of the joysticks in a really bad position for me. I'm going to put that one up there. There we go. Now we've got joystick A and joystick B. Okay, running the program. And that's the steering one. And that's the looking one. So if I come around here, and let's try looking. See if it sees my face.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Yay, it did. That's a fun little one. This one apparently uses the ultrasonic to go around, detect obstacles and play music. Let's give it a try. Which is an odd little one. So this is a very good example, this grayscale test, of how it uses the debug thing. It's literally just getting the values from the digital input. And if we go ahead and do that, this is our grayscale. So if we find something a different colour, like this piece of kitchen roll, and I've got a bit of wetness down there, something's dropped, and we go and put that underneath the grayscale sensor, it's gone slightly mental about it. And we've got skin colour, and I'm sure if we picked it up we'd get even different colours. So you see how you could use that to potentially get it to recognise colours and stuff. In fact, in one of these things it has a use of the grayscale sensor to do a sort of drop effect, like it works out the cliff detection. Now in it we've got the standard line, follow the line sensor stuff. There's a couple of examples of this, but one of the ones that's interesting, one called Bullfight, where the idea is we use a red cloth and say, you know, chase me. So first I've got this scouring thing. Let's see it. I'm over here. Come back. Which is all good. He's stuff up the road. The only problem being is if it decides something else is red, then it runs towards that. So there is much twiddling to do to get this thing working correctly. But why do you do this? I mean, I've run through some of the examples. There are a lot more there. But, you know, I'm interested to see how I can do my own stuff. You know, make my own controls, make my own code, use some of these examples to work out how. But to do that, it's, you know, it's not useful using your phone, even if you're putting over bits of block. So I'm going to connect this via a browser, and I'll show you how to do that next. So running the EZblock Studio in a browser is a case of looking through some of their docs about what happened and just running it essentially. The interface looks almost identical. Let me just turn the car on and we'll connect to it. I've connected to this before, so it's not particularly hard. When you do a connection this time, it's asking for the IP address. You can get this from your app as long as you've connected before and connected it to your home network. You'll be able to find this out, and it will generally stay on that address. And in here it's all much the same stuff. You can see what's going on, you can see what your car is, you've got all the example projects as before. Obviously though, if you were going to edit something in Python, you'd have a lot easier time doing stuff on the keyboard, because at the end of the day it's a keyboard. Now, one word of warning here is about the lack of any local storage. I went ahead and I created a project, and you can see it here.
The one problem with this one is in order to save it, you have to log in and it saves on their cloud storage, and their whole cloud system was in maintenance for like 2 days and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't get back to my code. Hopefully they'll change that and be able to do something a bit better. But I just wanted to go through what you had here, because you had actually quite a lot of the sort of block stuff. A lot of it's very obvious, like the sort of logic stuff, the loops, the math functions. There's text, there's lists, which is a little bit different. Lists, think of them as arrays if you're familiar with programming. There's music, which is a little bit different in this one. Color doesn't work on this one. This is about robots that have LEDs that can be programmed different colors. We can create variables. We've got whole functions, which is different. And above that, or I say below that, but above that in sort of functionality is threading. Threading, if you're unfamiliar with the concept, is kind of like a sub-process that runs on its own. It's kind of a more advanced concept. We've got very specifics for the PiCarX, so we've got stuff about changing the pan angle, face detection, text to speech, that sort of thing. Modules about like the grayscale module or the ultrasonic module. There is time, and remote is what happens when you start adding other things in. So if we go to this thing here, this is where you can go ahead and add bits and pieces to it, and you've got various things, and as soon as you add these became things you can look at, like joystick A is something, button A is something, slider A, that will all appear. I've had some issues with this in terms of like, oh, I want to have that large, for example, or medium, and then I notice I will sort of go away and I come back to it and it goes back to small, which is not ideal. But this is kind of more of a test bed for doing the program, and then I sort of take it to the phone for actually using it, because of course it's no fun like, you know, having to use a joystick and stuff with a mouse. The other thing I quite liked about this is the help is very easy to get to. So if it's a case of like, oh, what's this loop thing does, it's like, oh, you do that, and that tells you what's happening, and it gives you a couple of examples. I mean, it could always be a little bit better in terms of the amount or the detail of the documentation, but it's nice that it's just there. So what I've done with this program, I picked up on some of the things that I didn't like with the example code. First off, this start is just like, let's turn the camera on, and hence we've got a camera window here. What I've done, I've popped in 2 joysticks, one for the movement, and this one here is going to be for using the pan tilt. I've got a button here to basically do a sound effect, and I've got this slider here because there's a couple of things I picked up on, one of which was about the speed of the movement and could the camera keep up with it, and the other was about when it steers all the way over. I noticed the wheels were sometimes getting caught. So what I've done here, first there was no dead zone, so the car would always be sort of moving forward or backwards. So I've actually, sometimes I want to sort of steer first and move later, so I've put in the thing so I get my Y stick value, and I say if it's greater than 20 and it goes from like -100 at the bottom to 0 in the middle to +100, then do the movement, otherwise don't, and that gives me this dead zone where I can just move my wheels back and forth. And then what I notice is, because the camera isn't, you know, particularly good or doesn't update very well, if I'm trying to like FPV this, I will need something like the ability to give it a dual rate, for example. So I've got that slider there, and what happens is I'm saying go forward at the Y stick, which is like a 1 to 100 value as a, or a 0 to 100 forwards as a percentage, and then I'm multiplying that by the slider value divided by 100. So basically, if slider value is 4, then that's 1, so that's the full rate. But if the slider value is at 50, then that's 0.5, so that's like a 50% dual rate as such. And I'm also saying if the stick is not greater than 20, then don't move forward at all. And what I've got here, this corrects the problem
that I noticed where the wheels were sometimes turning too far. This is a mapping function which I haven't seen before. So what we do, we get the value from X on the joystick, which is the steering, and that goes from -100 to 100, and then we map that to -40 to 40, so that proportionally maps our steering and sets it to the right amount, and that means it's not going to collide with anything. And then I've just got, if someone presses the button, then play an emergency truck honk. And finally we got the pan tilt stuff, which is pretty easy. It's just turn camera, pan angle to this, turn camera, pan angle to that. So the one nice thing about the cloud storage is this is saved. If I click on that, it says save project, yes. And I can go ahead and now run this on my phone, because I use this environment to kind of develop it and be able to move stuff around easy. And then you can go to your phone and you can actually use it there. So let's do that bit next. Okay, here we are in the kitchen. The rain is coming down. I have got this code that I showed you before on the PC on the phone, because all we had to do is, of course, just log into our cloud thing, and I've got it set up so it's kind of a bit awkward on the screen because you can't change the shape of the buttons. But if we go ahead and play this, we've got video there. We should be able to, as I said before, one of the problems with being able to easily turn the wheels without making it go forward. Now it won't go forward until I go over 20% like that, but I can steer and then go ahead and move if I want to. We've got button A for the noise. We've got this joystick B, which is for the pan tilt. And we've got this slider value here. So right now, this is pretty much 100%. If I turn that slider down to, that's about 40%. Slower, we go further down. So at that 5%, it's a lot easier to see what's going on the screen. It's still not easy, but I thought what we'd try and do is have a little go behind myself, which is going to be quite pointless in terms of filming, but I'll be using this to drive with, and I'll change the camera position at some point so we know what's going on. So let's I find it much easier to drive with a very low percentage because the screen updates a little bit better. So it is now behind me, and I'm just going to pick the camera up. Now I'm around the corner so I'm not cheating. There we go, with the stick. That should be our camera there. So let's see if I can reverse back. Come back to myself. We're going to take a straight line. So you see, in that case we took a little basic program which took about 10 minutes to write. We got all these little bits and pieces on the screen that we could use to move the car around, a bit like a sort of FPV car with pan tilt and, you know, fun little sound effects. We got the ultrasonic sensor, the grayscale sensor, the color sensor. We got the lot there that we weren't using. Obviously you can do stuff with that and do more adventurous stuff. And I haven't really talked about Python programming yet, and that's because it's a level on in terms of what I want to do with it. So let's go back to the computer and explain what I'm talking about. Okay, so as mentioned before, this is what Python looks like, and this is one of the example projects. And yeah, there's nothing wrong with using this, but the point is it was just the same as using the block stuff. So you could take any one of these little bits of code
and you could run it in exactly the same way, but you'd be using exactly the same things. You'd be using the app or this block code web interface here, and it would be just the same as using the block interface, but just writing it differently. But the thing is with the Raspberry Pi, as it is now, is it is something you could actually just literally connect to. So I can SSH over to the Pi, and I wanted to do stuff here. I mean, you can see all the running processes here. I wanted to know if I could interact directly with it and do different things. And the answer is yes, although you have to do some quite convoluted things to it. Fortunately, this is documented reasonably well on the website called Play with Python. And the first thing you have to do is install a completely different version of the operating system. Basically, you're installing a general Debian version instead of the block stuff, and you're installing some Python libraries in order to get it running. And at that point, you can talk about SSHing or remote desktop over to the system and running stuff that way. So I'm going to do that. I'm not going to go through in great detail about what I do, because there's quite a lot to it, but fortunately it's all documented reasonably well. So if I have any hassles or problems that I run into, I'll be talking about it here. But let's get on with that. Let's give it a new OS, and then we'll be going away from the block programming, away from the EZblock stuff. And I think this is what I call the sort of more advanced configuration, because you're interacting with the OS directly, but it also gives you a lot more flexibility about what you can potentially do with it. So at this point, the window you're seeing is on my normal Mac desktop, and what I've done, I've used something called VNC Viewer to go in and look at the desktop that's on the Pi. And from the Pi, what I can do is directly, don't forget the Pi's still in the car, is alter the code on the fly without having to go through any interface or phone or anything like that, change some stuff, and I've got the video here on the screen. And the reason I think this is important for going ahead and being able to do more with it is now you're running directly on the car itself, albeit the Pi on the car. You can do things with this. So for example, the video I'm getting on the screen here, I could then pipe into a web server that also runs on the Pi and remotely see it that way, or have someone else drive the Pi from some way away using different interfaces that I can use and network stuff that I'd have to write myself to get there. But the point is, it's a lot more expandable in this way than simply having an app on your phone or on a desktop you can use. Of course, it's more complicated to use, and you do lose the ability to do block programming and basically use the nice little gadgets on the app. So it depends which way you want to go, but for me, I feel this is more interesting. But I won't go into any more detail on this side, as I feel I've kind of gone beyond the scope of what most people will be doing initially, at least with this. But the opportunity is there to expand further. That's the main thing. Yeah, I decided to stop it there as far as using SSH or remote desktop to go in and do stuff, because the scope there is kind of unlimited, and this video is already really long. So here it is, the PiCar-X from SunFounder, and there's certain pros and cons to it. Very good construction, definitely a pro. It's got a very solid aluminium shell, that's good. But it was slightly fiddly in certain areas to construct. A couple of badly thought out ideas about trying to get a screwdriver in to do things up when there just wasn't room. There's some very small self-tapping screws. It's not something kids are going to do on their own. It will need an adult or an older teenager to sort of go through this. Also, of course, it's not a complete set. You need a Raspberry Pi, I think a 3B, 4, I'm using a 4 on this one. You need to supply your own 18650s, and the Pi is quite power hungry, so you will need decent ones, not these ones which are absolutely hopeless and wouldn't last very long at all. I was driving it around. Yeah, it can take quite a bit of ampage, the Pi, when it gets running, and it does run quite hot. I would have preferred it if there was some cooling solution for this as well. but there wasn't. As far as the app goes, pretty good. It was very easy to do your block programming on it, and the block programming interface is pretty good, and they've got quite a lot of options available for you. Some I've never seen before in this sort of thing, which was nice. I did have issues with some of the layout in terms of getting buttons on the screen. The video kept resizing to the smallest version. The buttons are huge. I would have liked to have shrunk them down. Like, obviously you need, for thumb joysticks, they're a certain size, but when you're just doing like a little button to press in and out, that doesn't have to be this big and fill up most of your phone screen. But it was nice that there was a web interface that you could use to do the programming, and you had the option of Python if you wanted to, and then that would go onto your phone as well through the cloud interface. But I did have that issue with the cloud system going down for a couple of days, so I really do hope they'll introduce the idea of a local storage in future updates. So the question is, should you buy it? It kind of depends what you're doing. I really thought the saving grace of this one, and what really differentiates it from other things, is the expandability you've got. As soon as you untether yourself from using the app and the block programming, and you just basically remote desktop directly to the Pi and you can run stuff, the amount of stuff you can do becomes almost unlimited. As I said, one of the things I might have done is created a web interface, so I'd get a friend remotely in a different part of the country to be able to join to it and drive it around. Yeah, having that, the ability to run a web server on here as well is amazing, and the fact you'd just be able to connect to it and change the program and do different things just on the fly is really attractive to me. And if you did that, you'd obviously have the advantage of learning an awful lot about Linux and how to run things on the Pi. The instructions about moving over to that installation of Debian weren't perfect in terms of what you had to do. There were a couple of things to get like the remote desktop running that needed to be done that weren't in the documentation. That's kind of how it is with Linux. It's like you won't get all the answers, but the idea is you go off and find stuff, you learn how to do it, you learn a lot about it. And ditto, you would, because as soon as you started doing stuff on this, it'd be the case of, how would I do that? How would I make a web server? How would I interact with the other Python with some of my other processes? And you can tie all those things together. That's what's quite exciting. But of course, if you just wanted to drive around as a little robot car, there's cheaper kits based on Arduino that will do it. But yeah, the thing I like about this, more expandability, you can just keep going. You're not going to grow out of it. But there you go. This has been the PiCar-X, kindly supplied by SunFounder for review, so many thanks to them. And of course, you'll find links down below for where you can check it out in more detail. I hope that review's been helpful. If you've lasted all the way to the end, well done to you. I will catch you next one. Bye for now.
Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.